Today, we will discuss the importance of leadership in this challenging time. We will focus on the responsibilities of leaders to provide transparency, hope, and realism at the same time. As leaders, we will talk about how it is okay to share your feelings with your teams to ensure that they know you are human and they are not alone. Our host, Kathy Eastwood, will guide you through a discussion that will allow you to tap into your strengths and weave them into your team's unique characteristics so that you can deliver results through any storm. First, a little bit about our host. She is an accomplished executive with over 25 years of progressive experience in driving success through strategic business planning, operational efficiency, and employee engagement in both large corporations as well as small, privately owned businesses. She has held various leadership roles in human resources, operations, finance, sales, services, customer success, project management, marketing, and engineering. Often described as a nurturing driver, she knows how to successfully get things done through strong employee engagement. While preparing this intro, I thought about Kathy and her success. I have an advantage in a sense that I am lucky enough to be Kathy's client. This gives me an insider's view to the leadership skills and success Kathy possesses. What I learned, though, is that Kathy has influenced others with her personal style. So I decided to reach out to a few of her colleagues and clients who shared the reflections about Kathy's delivery and how it made them feel. Here are just some of the things that I heard. Kathy practiced empathy that was actually acknowledged and how much she valued me as a person first. She realized that care, compassion, and understanding become the key priorities. And then, what I loved, my perspective on how to lead my team shifted. Once I focused on each individual and their role on the team, our results soared and we consistently met and exceeded our goals. And now, without further ado, I turn our discussion over to Kathy.
Thank you, Karen. Wow, that's really nice to hear those words. Thank you so much. So one of my core values is to inspire and enable others. So to hear this introduction and what others have said really does humble me and makes me feel good. But a lot of that is because I brought myself to the workplace and to others when I'm leading teams and when I'm coaching. So I've been a leader since high school. It started with the Hugh O'Brien Youth Leadership Foundation that I was part of in 10th grade. I was also the drum major of the band. Yes, for those that are snickering, I did go to band camp. And I was the captain of the volleyball team, the basketball team, and even the badminton team. So leadership was part of how I grew up, and I was constantly looking to motivate my team and figure out how we could get involved, work hard, mental toughness, and win. That's what we were ultimately focused on. And when I got into the business world, and before I was actually leading any teams, I was doing some training, and that training was around project management. And for those of you that know me, I am someone that needs a plan. I love being very action-oriented, having the tasks in hand, date-oriented. And so, I was doing this training class and I was getting very intense on tasks, and you have to have dates and you have to have critical paths and making sure that you can complete your project on time. And I'll never forget this moment that a gentleman came up after the class and he said, "Kath, great training. I learned a lot about task management. That's fabulous. But to be honest, you really can't manage a project without managing the resources. The people are so critical. Let me introduce you to this book called The Deadline by Mark DeMarco. And it talks about how critical people are really to your success." And it was game changing for me. And so that was over 20 years ago. And it really taught me how important it is to have people in mind when you're trying to get things done. And that has been my focus all along. When we look at COVID-19 and what we're up against, these are unprecedented times. I mean, we've never had to deal with anything like this. And I know there's a lot of people with strong leadership skills, but what I found over the last couple of weeks as I'm talking to different people, there's been a real vacuum around leadership. And what happens is in the times of calm and clarity and things are going well, it's easy to, use the right skills. It's easy to have the meetings, team meetings that you should have, to have the conversation. And quite honestly, people need less of that communication. But when you have a crisis going on, that's when your tendencies go back to what your natural preferences are, and you forget some of the basics. So what I want to talk about today is really that to give you permission, right, to be human, because during these times of crisis, it's being human, which is so critical to everybody, and everybody being a leader. And so where I come from and some of my beliefs, I believe that everybody is a leader. So I don't really care if you're the CEO of the company or you're the janitor that are keeping everything clean, whether you're the oldest member on the team or the youngest. Everybody is a leader. And the way I look at it is your responsibility is help inspire and enable everybody on your team to help get through times of both, normalcy and then craziness. But in the time of crisis, this is when it's most important. Think about personally, just your own thoughts that are going through your mind during this time. There's a tremendous amount of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You'll hear me use the word FUD quite a bit as we're talking today. But if that thought is going through your mind and that talk track, you have to assume that most of the people around you are having some similar kind of talk track. So it's really important to understand that and be able to communicate with others during that time and address it. It's there. So it's important to focus on it. And so when I look at leadership, and I've been working, investigating different styles of leadership and what's really important, there's 3 aspects of leadership that I think are so critical. And I will refer to this as E3 leadership. And we'll talk about what that actually is. But one of the first aspects is self-awareness. Then it's about having a framework you can follow and having the behaviors that you really need. So let's drill down a little bit. And first, around awareness. The first step to leading is recognizing that we don't know everything. We need to seek to understand. And I love this learning continuum to use as a guide as you go through any situation, quite honestly. And I love to use this as an example think of a teenager learning to drive. They're all excited to drive and they can't wait to get into the car for the first time. And when they get into the car, it's suddenly, they just assume this is going to be easy. So they're unconsciously incompetent at that time. Then when they get in there and they look at the panels, they look at the steering wheel, and they go, whoa, wait a minute, maybe I don't know everything here. And so now they're aware that they need to get the lessons going on, and they've hit that conscious incompetence place. And as you start to learn, you learn the skills, you practice, you acquire what you need to learn. And by the time you're probably taking your test, you're consciously competent. You know what you need to do, you know how you do it, you've practiced it a bit, but you still have to constantly think about it. You have to make it a habit. Eventually, it becomes second nature, and unconsciously you're competent at it, and it's easy to do. And it's funny, last week as I was preparing and actually came up with the idea that I should do this webinar, it dawned on me that I'm unconsciously competent sometimes when it comes to bringing the human element into the workplace, but not everyone is. And so that's why I wanted to be able to talk about this stuff, because it's important that we are continuously learning and aware. And some of these things are, you can read books, you can watch podcasts, you can go through different training, go through coaching. But the most important element is just understanding that we all have an opportunity to learn every day in every area. Just the fact that you're all joining me tells me that you really are self-aware yourselves, and that's appreciated. That's a great first step. But here's another interesting fact, and feel free to type in some of your thoughts on here. Do you know what percentage of people do not achieve their goals? So it's interesting. Let's see if we got anyone guessing. Let me see if I can see everyone's. Yep, I got some guesses of 60, 85, 75. Good guesses. 92% is what the data tells us do not reach their goals. That means 8% are doing something differently to really achieve their goals. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I'm very fortunate because I have been able to accomplish a lot of things. And I realized that perhaps there was something I was doing that was unique to help me get there. And what I recognized is there's an E3 framework that really has 3 elements to help you get there. The first one is being able to express what your goal is, really understanding what that is and having that purpose. And you know, I call it the why. If anyone has listened to or read the book by Simon Sinek, I'm a big fan of The Power of Why. And when you can explain the why, when you can detail it out, when you can envision it, you can identify what it is that you want to get to. And so then you put this idealistic, and by the way, I use the word idealistic because you want to shoot for the moon here. And because if you don't quite get it, you're going to be well beyond realistic. So you want to shoot for the goals. And then the next thing, the second E, is you want to execute against the plan. So now you know where you want to get to. What are the steps to get there? And that's about executing a plan and having the goals set in place to be able to do that. And then the third element is really about bringing the people with you. And this comes back to that resource management piece I started with, right? It's about the people that are surrounding you, that are working with you, that care, that want to help you. And you need to care for them as well. So that's the engagement side, the third E. And what I've learned over time is we all have strengths in one of these 3 areas. And some of us are better at having the vision, right? They're visionaries. They have, you know, the creative types that are great and all these great ideas. They're the ones that struggle then to actually operate and go get it done. And so, you know, I have a client who is one of these visionaries. She's fabulous. And she has this great idea. And so we've been working together on how to operationalize it. How do we break it down? How do we get the right people to help her? How do we put the, right go-to-market strategy together to get there? So that's the execution part that we could work on to make sure that we get to that place. You know, if I look at execution, that's where one of my strengths is. I sometimes wouldn't be thinking idealistically. You know, I would stay very functional and in my lanes. And when I stepped out of that and started to look more idealistically, I was able to accomplish a lot more. So I actually sat down and wrote, what would my dream job, if I could do anything in the entire world, what would it be? And I actually managed to define it, share it with others, and actually land it. And one of the key things I learned during that time is I wasn't explicit enough. I didn't actually say where I would like the dream job to be, and it ended up being in a different state. But still, it's the fact that I was able to accomplish exactly what it was that I wanted. You know, I did the same thing with a workshop with a team, and they were able to define, rather than being task-oriented, we pulled together all of the team in India. We had 30 leaders come together, and we performed a 4-day workshop. And they were able to come together and create their rallying cry of what they wanted to do differently. And then it's about engaging everyone. You know, if you know where you want to go, you know how to get there, then you can help engage both yourself, your team, and everyone else. And that's what we're really going to focus on, is this engagement when you're working with your team to get them excited. The next piece is around the behaviors. So I want you to stop again and think about who's a really good leader that you've worked with. You know, it could be someone direct that you've worked with. It could be a politician. It could be a family member. Who do you idolize? Who do you think is really fabulous that uses, you know, these behaviors that you think are so important? So you get a chance, write it down. And then on the other side of the piece of paper, write down someone that you don't think is a very good leader. Now look at some of these words on this chart, because these are the words that really are the behaviors that are so important to leaders that are effective. They're authentic, they're mindful, they're grateful. You know what? Basically, they're human. So think about yourself. So we're now in a crisis and a lot of change is going on, and it's crazy. So think about yourself And are you exemplifying these behaviors in this time of crisis? And are you bringing your humanity? Are you bringing your full self to the table? So I look at this, and it's about leadership. It's not about you. It's about your teams. At the end of the day, it's about managing the human condition. So what I want to challenge you on for the next couple of minutes is really to leverage your empathy and your courage to think differently, to bring your full self to the game. Because at the end of the day, what you're going to hear today is there's probably nothing new that you're going to hear, to be quite honest, because there really isn't that much when it comes to leadership. The key is remembering it and practicing it. And you have to remember it and practice it over and over again. So when we look at the managing the human condition, there's 4 key areas that I think are just so critical. Because remember that FUD I was talking about, that fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's what you're looking to manage during this time. You know, it's not business as usual anymore. So you have to think about what all the added stresses are. Even if you've normally worked from home and you're like, what's the big deal? I've been on video for the last 10 years. It's the fact that you're now at home with 3 other family members. You're home maybe with a child that has to figure out how to do schooling remotely. You know, 2 spouses in a small space. You can't go out. I mean, you name the things that are completely different. I was talking to different folks, and they said they're panicked because their kids are in the medical profession, and you know, they're on the front line. What's going to happen to them? The fear, uncertainty, and doubt is rampant, and we need to recognize that. But we need to remember we have to take care of ourselves. We have to remember to understand how we normally react in certain situations. Everyone reacts differently. And you also need to understand how others react so that you can then align accordingly. We want to make sure we stop for a moment and make a plan. And always we have to remember the basics. First and foremost, you must understand your needs before you can better understand and care for others. I'm going to guess most of us have been on a plane at some point in time, and you've heard the messaging. In the event of emergency, put your oxygen mask on first. There's a reason that is said, because if you're not healthy, you can't take care of the person next to you. So as leaders, it's our responsibility to be healthy, both mentally and physically. It's okay to be selfish. And selfish, this word is really interesting. I had a long debate a couple of years ago and wrote a blog on it, because to me, my husband had said, you're being very selfish. And I was like, wow, very taken back. But after the discussion, it was okay. And we realized that there was good intent behind what I was doing. And it was, I was taking care of myself, which then allowed me to take care of the family. And it was important. You know, and things to take care of yourself, it's about having a routine. I get up every single morning and I do a miracle morning. It starts with meditation, and then I do affirmations, exercise, and most importantly, sitting down and having a cup of tea and planning the rest of the day. It's a routine that I crave. And once that goes out the window, my day is not always the best. I look to take a break. You need to make sure that you're taking care of your family. I have another founder that I've worked with, and as we were talking, I could see it on her face. She was getting pale. She was agitated. I was like, what's going on? And I realized that she wasn't taking care of herself. She was so focused on the tasks at hand that we really agreed to take the weekend, and she needed to spend time with her family and her daughter, who's so critical in her life. Came back Monday completely refreshed. It's so important that we continue to take these moments. But it's also, as a leader, it's your responsibility to set the example for others. I had a leader once I loved working for her. She knew how to get things done. She was very empathetic. And she was actually going to take a vacation. She was going to Canyon Ranch, a spa, to unwind for a week. And I thought that was fabulous, something I would love to do. So she said, okay, well, they told me I can't bring my computer and my phone, but I'm bringing it anyway. And I said, what, excuse me? What do you mean? And she said, well, just in case, you guys can call me, it's fine. I said, no, time out. This is the whole point of you going, is to take care of yourself and to regenerate. And I said, let me ask you a question. If I was going, would you, and I told you I was bringing my computer, what would you say? She goes, oh, I would absolutely tell you not to bring your computer. You need to leave it at home. This is the time for you to recharge. I said, okay, but you're not setting the example then for me. What you're basically telling me is you can go away and bring your computer. And really what you're saying is bring your computer when you go. And it's that realization that we set the example. So as leaders, if we're not talking about ourselves, if we're not sharing our own fear, uncertainty, and doubts, how are we giving permission to our employees to share as well? So we really have to set the example of taking care of ourselves so that we can allow our teammates and our team members and our peers to take care of themselves as well. So building on self-awareness and self-care, it comes down to now really understanding what your preferences are. Understanding how you respond to situations, how you make decisions. I'm sure many of you have done some kind of assessment, based on behavioral psychology from Jung or others. There's Myers-Briggs, there's Color Insights, there's a lot of emotional intelligence type tools as well. I've actually gotten involved with Clarity 4D, and I've gotten accredited to be able to do the profiling through that company. And the way we really look at our preferences there is we're looking at if you're extroverted or introverted, if you're thinking or feeling type, and intuition versus sensing. And when you can look at these different types and what our preferences are, you can see yourself, you can see how others see you, and you can see where there's potential during crisis. During normal times, you probably wander outside of your normal preferences because you're comfortable. It's during times of stress that really brings you to where your preference and your comfort level is. So you're going to respond based on these. So for me, I think I told you that I'm very detail-oriented, I'm very action-oriented. I have a lot of red energy. I'm sure those that know me wouldn't be surprised by me saying that. But I'm also very extroverted from a social perspective. I love interaction. I love feedback. But I'm also caring and empathetic. And then there's a bit of me that I'll do the data if I have to. But every one of us have these different preferences. And by knowing that, you understand how you're normally going to react and how you're going to react under crisis. But it's important to understand what your people are going to be doing and how others are going to respond. You probably have someone on your team that's saying, I don't have time to worry. Let's go. We got to move on. We got to, I'm nervous. We got to get this done. You may have someone else in your team that's saying, hey, we got to follow the rules. We got to follow the guidelines. We must do it this way. Someone else is potentially sitting there saying, my life is over. I have no social interaction. I'm used to the face-to-face. And someone that has more green energy is worried that people are in trouble. We need to help. How can I help? So we all have these tendencies. And again, in crisis, it comes out differently. So you need to listen and understand what they're really saying and why, so that you can help relate better. You can be more empathetic to what their feelings are. And so, if someone that has more red energy, provide them with a plan that's crisp and focused with some action-oriented items for them. For those that are more social, ask them to inject fun into the group. Ask them to, get a playlist going. Ask them to have some social events. So for each type of person that has these different tendencies, the more you can understand it, the more you can provide a framework to work together as a team and really help each other through this time of a little bit of craziness, to be honest. So we've talked about self-care and understanding ourselves and others. The next piece of advice here is really to stop. And that's one of the hardest things to do when you're in, this intense moment where everything is changing, because you're being reactive, and that's what is called for. But it's so important to take a step back and really look to be how to be proactive and start planning. And it goes back to understanding what goals have already been set forth. just because you're in change doesn't mean everything has changed. There is still a company direction that you're trying to go after. You still have certain priorities as a team. You have business as usual things you still have to get done. You still have strategic goals that you can be focusing on. So there's an opportunity to reassess where you are and prioritize, right? So you need to look tactically on what needs to get done right now, but you also want to look strategically. What can we be doing? How can I take advantage of this time? Or how do I prepare if something goes differently? And you need to be ready to be agile. What if scenarios? You know, take the time to sit back and really think about this. And what if, unfortunately, half my team was to get sick tomorrow? What do I do? What are the most important things that absolutely have to get done so that I can do them first, second, and third? What if another team has an immediate need? Can I go and help them? Can I free up people to go do that? So you want to start thinking about how I can think bigger in this time of need to help others, to help your team. Because if you're constantly in that reactive state, it's going to be very challenging. Now, this last piece is really important because sometimes we have a tendency to do this. When we're in the shower, we're thinking about these things. And what happens in those situations is we're doing them in a vacuum. And so what happens is we feel confident, we've thought through everything, we've done the what if scenarios, but we haven't shared that with others. So when you have some of these thoughts, you want to start engaging your team with them. They want to know what your thought process is, what's going on, what if this was to happen. The more you can share with them, you're giving them the chance to have transparency into it. You know, I always say, when there's a vacuum, people will fill it. And so when you think about it, if you don't hear from your manager for a few days, your first reaction is, oh crap, I got to fill this. I got to figure out my own plan. Well, suddenly they're working on a plan that doesn't even align. And you're like, well, whoa, hey, hold on. I've already thought about this. That's why you want to continue to communicate and bring them into the loop. And really, it's about remembering the basics at this point, right? When you really look at what it is you're doing during this time, it's about engaging your team. And it really isn't a lot more than the basics, because they're looking to you to communicate and demonstrate transparency, hope, and realism all at the same time. You know, it's easy to be rah, rah, optimistic, and life's going to be grand, and don't worry, and all is good. Well, no one's really going to believe that, right? They need to know that you're being realistic about this as well. And so you need to find that right balance. And again, think of those 4 colors, because everybody on your team needs a little something different, right? The person with the yellow energy needs a lot more of that optimistic view, but someone that's more green and thoughtful needs to know that you've thought through everything. So the more that you can share, the better you're going to be as a leader. You know, and this is what really shocked me over the last couple of weeks as I was talking to people. These were some of the basics that really got dropped at first. You know, and I also saw a ton of good behaviors and good examples of over communicating. So no matter how much you're communicating, there's no lack of what you can communicate. And I think the worst thing that could happen at this point is someone could say, I've heard enough, right? Let someone come to you and say, stop with the over communication. And so when I look at it, is you want to make sure that people know that they can come and approach you and talk about different things. You may think you've addressed that, you may have said it, but have you really? And I'll challenge you on this, because this is a rule of thumb that I've learned. Until you tell someone 7 times, it doesn't really sink in. And when you can use that tip, you go, okay, well, I've told them once, I put it in an email, I said it on an all hands, I said it in a one-on-one, all right, I better go back and try it again, right? So, and then you have to demonstrate it. And you can demonstrate it through the one-on-ones. So as you're talking to your team members, you can be sharing your own experiences, you can be personal in these conversations, and you can bring the team together, both for work conversations and non-work conversations. You know, as I said before, someone that doesn't hear from their manager for a few days will worry. So it's a great opportunity to bring your team together. The other thing that was really very interesting as I started to think through this, I've been working from home for over 20 years. And there is no better interaction among a team than when you can be face to face, and it's fabulous. And there's times that you're just sitting there before the meeting starts, or there's a break and you're going to get a coffee, that you start to talk about personal things and you get to know each other. But there had been a tendency, whenever I got on a business video chat, right, because I worked on a global team, so we were almost always on video, you almost immediately got into work. You turned the video on, you said good morning, and you went right in. Now, because everyone's in the same situation, we have an opportunity as leaders to take advantage of this and really get to know our teams a bit better. And I've heard amazing stories from different leaders over the last couple of weeks that said, you know, one of the times we've gotten together as a leadership team to just chat and start planning was 10 o'clock at night, because we chose that that's when we wanted to get together. The kids were down to, they're done for the day. I could relax. I could start to think. And what we did was share our homes. You know, I took the camera and I showed everyone where I lived and where I was working. You know, I've heard other stories where people had a virtual lunch and they all came together and brought their dogs or their cats or, you know, their other family furry friends to the table to meet everybody. So you have this opportunity as you're working from home to share your personal side. And this starts with you as the leader. You're setting the example in these situations. So I can't overemphasize enough how these basics really will make a difference during these times. So in summary, you know, with what we've just talked about, there's a lot of simple things that you can do. And it's not a lot, but will make a huge difference with your teams and also with yourself. You know, take this time to really re-explore what your values are. What are the most important things for you? And when you understand your priorities, which are probably going to start with family first, then you can share that with your teams, right? Family comes first, no matter what. And I only work with leaders. I love working with leaders that feel that same way, because that's my value and that's what I care about. We'll work everything else out. As long as your family is safe and healthy, then we'll work on the next piece. You know, we talked about establishing a routine, taking breaks. You know, we talked about understanding your own preferences and your team members' preferences so that you can all work together better as a team. You know, if you look at planning, you know, we talked about thinking tactically and strategically through all of this. And make sure you're constantly connecting with your teams. You know, a couple of clients that I worked with over the last week, well, I've actually been working with them for the last couple months, and, you know, we've gone through all the basics. We've done the assessments. They know what their preferences are. They've got their goals all aligned. You know, they know their strengths and their weaknesses and which ones to work with. But last week when we met, I realized they went right into reactionary mode. They had abandoned the basics. You know, they were planning, but they weren't really communicating it. And so to really understand your team, you've got to connect with them, you know, and let them know that once you open that virtual door, and then this is what one of my clients did. He said, once I opened that virtual door, I felt much more connected. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We have to ensure that we have each other's back. You know, I love this image because in reality, we're all in this boat and you're the captain of that boat, right? You worry about the safety of your crew. You worry about what the destination is and where you're going to get there and how you're going to get there. But you can't get there alone. You need everybody in that boat and even people outside of that boat helping you, giving you directions, figuring out what's going on. And if one person was to get sick in the team, you all need to pitch in and make sure that it's still going to happen. And the best way as a leader is to make sure that they know you care, right? And that's about building the trust, being yourself, being honest and authentic, And at the end of the day, it's really about being human. And what you want to focus on is, as a leader, knowing that together you will be able to weather any storm. So with that, let me turn it over to you guys and see if you have some questions. And I'm sure you've heard enough of me chatting for the moment. Karen, we have some questions that have come in.
We do. The first question we had, very interesting. What do I do if someone on my team says they are uncomfortable on video?
Great question. I've had this before. And, you know, actually, let me tell you a funny story. I got on a conscious capitalism call last week. And in the past, you'd always get a couple people that would turn their video on. But because everyone was on home and everyone was uncomfortable, everyone started turning their video on. It's the first time ever I was on a call with 35 people and everyone's video was on, because people were looking to connect. But you are going to have that situation where not everyone does want to connect. So one of the things you want to do is start small and start with one-on-one calls, right? So rather than setting it up and forcing everyone to come in and show their video, start with a one-on-one and say, oh, see, that wasn't too bad. The other thing that actually has helped in a couple of situations is people turn their own view off. And I'm going to tell you a really funny story, because I had this with my father, because we do virtual cocktails now on Sundays. And he's like, he was obsessed with staring at himself on the video. And I said, Dad, just turn your video off and then you can see the rest of us. He was like, oh. So yes, he did turn it off in that sense, but it started to get him used to the idea of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So now he can turn on the video and he doesn't have to look at himself. He looks at the rest of us during that time. And, you know, other things you can do, you can move the camera back. So one of the things that we used to do with our team, because we'd have remote people and people in the conference room, we would set up the computer like it was one of the people in the room. And so this way you don't feel like it's one-on-one directly like I am right now, but you can get a bigger sense and view of everybody in the room, and you get a little more comfortable going that way.
We have another question here, Kathy. What do I do if senior management is not sending any messages or providing guidance, or bad guidance at that?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right? Good one.
I've heard this a lot, and you know, it's interesting. What I usually coach people, you need to be true to yourself first and foremost, because at the end of the day, you're still responsible for your own actions and for your team's actions. So what you want to do is share with them what you do know. So hopefully there is some stuff that they are sharing and you can leverage. But as long as you have your goal, your purpose in place, that's what you can share with the team. And then you can continue to dialogue with others to understand what the company's doing, what others, you know, what some of your peers are doing, and bring it back. But during times like this, it's most important that you focus on coming together as a team yourself, completing the tasks that you've been asked to do, rather than worrying about everyone else in the meantime. But you've got to make sure you're focusing on your team and being true to yourself. Great question.
Kathy, we
Yeah.
have another question. During this crisis, how often do you suggest communicating with your team? Is it daily, every other day, more or less?
Personally, I'd recommend daily. Even if your message is, I have no updates. Because as I mentioned before, when you're going through a crisis and there is so much information that is coming in constantly, I mean, we're inundated with the news, right? It's definitely something you want to look at and give it daily, right? It could be in simple email as, I have no updates. And what you're doing is you're closing that vacuum. So actually, I'm looking at the chat window. So Mark is saying that weekly one-on-one calls, but he's now adding twice a week stand-up calls on Monday and Wednesday. I've heard other people that are actually just doing a stand-up call every day just to have something. So you need to know your team and what's going to mean the most for them. Because there are some people that have very high red energy that if you try to meet with them on a constant basis, they're probably going to go, ugh, enough's enough. And so you need to just think about how they personally feel. And in those cases, you might want to just keep it to 5 minutes. And then the people that do want to communicate more, you can tell them to set up the time with you individually.
Okay, we have another question. I have never had to put a strategic plan or a what-if scenario in place. How do I go about doing that without any guidance from above?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's, you need to just stop and think, what would I do in that situation, right? And think inwardly of, a lot more than you probably give yourself credit for. And so a strategic plan is nothing more than thinking out a month, 3 months, 6 months, 3 years. So just stop, think about it and go, where do you want to be? Where do you need to be? What are the goals that we need to achieve? And, ideally, you are going to have the guidance that you can go talk to someone in the leadership chain. But you can find a lot of information probably that you didn't even realize was out there. There could be an intranet of information about the company and they have the purpose. There might have been an all hands, around that. So, it's really up to you on looking for the different information. And if you really want some help, feel free to reach out to me, Kate Eastwood at E=Y, and I'm happy to sit down with you. Okay, Karen, I see another one from Annie.
Annie had made an excellent comment there, and more like a question comment that I think needs to be addressed. It's excellent.
Okay, so she's in a situation that my manager doesn't communicate with me. I feel like I need to chase him for updates, and it makes me feel, uh-oh, I just lost it. Bear with me. Chase him for updates, and it makes me feel like I'm left alone and I really can't check in. So, we're all going to be in that situation, but one of the things that I've learned is to start to communicate back to others. So if you're in that situation, it's not bad for you to say, hey, here's my preferences, here's what I need in this situation during this fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Could you just help me, tell me what's going on, or ping if you know anything new, and try to have the dialogue with them as well. Because, quite honestly, well, it's one of the reasons I started the webinar, right? There is a vacuum, quite honestly. So if you know what best practices are, you can demonstrate, and you can also ask others to try to help you and tell them what you need as far as a leader is concerned. A great comment, Annie. Thank you.
We have another question, Kathy. What do you think if the rule of one of my managers is, in the absence of explicit instructions from above, make the assumption that is most favorable to yourself?
That's an interesting one. I think if you're using your values, I think it's absolutely spot on. So if you really think about what are important to you and what you would do in that situation, and knowing that, we need to take care of, the priorities, family first, we need to get these business as usual, need to get these things done. If you're doing it based on true values that are good, then that guidance is fabulous. If you really look at that and try to take it from a negative point of view and use it as permission to go do what you want to do, then I would say it's not great guidance. But my gut is they're really telling you is, I've given you a lot of guidance to tell you where my priorities are. Now I trust you to go make it happen and use your best judgment. So I'm going to make the assumption that that's the way they're looking at it and the guidance that they're making. And if it's not, then I really ask you to think and be a leader, because we should all be focused on what our values are and bringing ourselves and our values to the workplace.
Great. Okay, next, Kathy. Where will the inflection point be? We quickly forget what is required in times of crisis is different. Different is sometimes considered bad. How do you approach finding that balance between the needs of the team, leaders, and the broader organization?
It's a good question. There's no right answers to any of these, right? And when I look at it, it's why I really went back to having those 4 areas, right? Having that being in the best physical and mental place that you can be, making sure that you're looking at the big picture and being self-aware of what's happening both in your world and everyone else's. And then you can take that look and try to find the balance. Because I have a saying, and actually my father taught me this, no one wakes up with bad intent. And you really shouldn't judge until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. So, if you think along those lines that no one is really trying to screw you, right? And they're trying to figure their own stuff out, the best way to do it is have a conversation with them. So if you find that you're being pulled in one direction that isn't really true to who you are and what you believe, the best thing to do is have an honest dialogue about it and sit down and say, here's what I'm thinking, here's what I'm feeling. What can we do about this? How do I balance what you need? How do I balance what my team needs? And what do you suggest we do together?
Okay, Kathy, we have a comment. If you could read that in the chat, that I think is excellent.
Is that from Mark?
Yes.
So we have a team meeting every day at 8 a.m. for a firm 15-minute with the cameras on. Sidebar discussions ensues afterwards. And it's been very helpful for the team camaraderie. Mark, thanks for sharing. I really appreciate it. And it's great to see you as well. I agree with you. I love the stand-ups. And if you're in agile development, this is something that's been going on for some time. And so, my biggest advice here is to find out what works for your team and be consistent. The worst thing you can do is go gung-ho in and say, hey, this is fabulous, and we're going to do this, and then you stop after 2 days. So whatever you start, you have to make sure you continue, because that's how you really drive genuinity throughout all this, and you be authentic because you want to do it, not because you have to do it. And so think about how you feel and what would work for you and what would work for your team. And I love that idea. I love the stand-ups. I've heard a couple of teams have been getting together for happy hour every Thursday night, and they're bringing cocktails in to just, get together. Some managers like to have emails that they send, and they send an email on a daily basis. And that was actually one of the things I used to do. I used to send a message to my team. Here's what's happening. Here's what I know. If you have any questions, we'll talk about it on the one-on-one of their team meeting. Other teams I've been told have set up Slack channels so that they can constantly be in contact with others. One of the things that I've actually done with a couple of people I work with is we have an Alexa. Okay, good. She didn't go on. But we'll keep it on during the day, and we can just have a chat, just like we were sitting across from each other in the office. So it's about finding what was your normal and just really adjusting and having a new normal throughout.
Kathy, someone just made a comment about that that I think just ties in with your point. I think something subtle but very critical here is actual voice-to-voice meetings. In other words, don't hide behind texting and social media, which I think is brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous comment, Deetra. And it really, again, it goes back to being personal, because people want to be connected. And they want to see your face, right? Because it's easy to hide in a text message. It's harder to come out, and you can see if I have panic, or I'm in pain, or I'm upset, or I'm happy, right? And you get to see that when you're on video. Because if you were in an office space and that's what you were normally doing, you knew when someone was having a bad day. And you couldn't hide, in the cube and you could try, but it really didn't work. People knew. And we have to try to bring that same humanity into the workplace. I think it's just so important. So Karen, I know we're hitting the time. Shall I, any other questions, or should
We
I
have
wrap
one
up?
more question, and then maybe we'll wrap.
Okay.
Do your communications extend to vendors and suppliers, or just to internal partners? Are other stakeholders important to be in touch with as well?
That's a great question. I have a gut, I know who that's from, but
Mm-hmm.
I strongly believe in the values of conscious capitalism. And I truly believe in the leadership profit chain, which says you need to focus on all of your stakeholders within an organization. And that is your people that work for you. It's your customers, it's your investors, it's your suppliers, it's everybody in this time. And so when you heard me talk in the beginning around leadership, you know, everybody is a leader, and everybody should be thinking about everyone that they're dealing with and they're interacting with and helping. So absolutely, this is not just about your team members, and I know I've definitely focused on that, but I truly believe when your people are happy, they treat your customers with dignity and respect and take care of them. And then that's when your company will consciously do well and profit. But you need to focus on all of those stakeholders up in front before you can worry about anything on the back end. So great question. And I truly believe in that. Great.
That
Well,
seems
thank
to
you.
be it.
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. I appreciate it. So I just want to thank everyone for their time today and joining me in something that I just am so passionate about, because we are truly leaders through all of this. And if you really look at the components and being self-aware, follow the framework, and really exemplify those leadership behaviors, and most important, be human and bring yourself into this environment, into this workplace, you really will excel in a time of crisis. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. I wish you all the best of luck during this time. It is crazy. It's scary, and there's days that I am thinking it's going to be over tomorrow, and then there's days I think it's going to be going on for a long time. But what I do know is this is going to change a lot of things, and we need to be able to think differently, react accordingly, and just put ourselves out there and do the best job that we can. So thank you so much for joining. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out. I'm happy to jump on a call with you, strategize, help you build a plan, whatever it is. My email is keastwood@e=y, and I'm here to help. Thank you so much.